and we use it. We test it regularly.
You're now using, instead of the wire services, you're using your own internal teletype system, aren't you?
Yeah, we have a center.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me, from which we test this regularly, and but in addition to simply running the tests, we've got FEMA staff people that are going out to the industry, and we're having conferences to discuss how to improve the system, and we're getting the whole federal government involved.
I recall one instance in which the code words actually got out by mistake on the network, and the compelling thing about that, when it looked like it was signaling the real thing, was not many people paid any attention to it.
Yeah, well, I don't recall that, and I've read about that. But you're absolutely right. It is awesome that people didn't pay any attention to it, you see, and it's that kind of lack of knowledge of what is going on and how to respond to it that we're trying to address in fulfilling our legal mandate, which is what it is, to put in place an integrated emergency management system.
How about flood insurance, crime insurance, riot reinsurance? Of course, those are, you're talking about such tremendous costs when you get into a whole city being inundated by a natural disaster or what have you. Only the federal government, of course, can take over that. Does that rightfully belong under your aegis? Who else?
Well, the Federal Insurance Administration is one of the sub-elements that was brought into FEMA. Mm-hmm. The flood the three kinds of insurance that you're describing, the largest obviously is the flood insurance.
Yeah. And I think that was what? That was
right now it's about 120 or 30 billion dollars worth of policies that are out there. If we ever get the 40 days and nights of rain, we're in deep trouble, besides water, no pun intended. But that the Congress, I think, correctly established that insurance program, because at the time that it was established, there was no place to get in flood-prone areas insurance unless there was some kind of guarantee or subsidy or low premium program. That program involves a continuous floodplain survey, which FEMA does. The establishment, and I'm oversimplifying this.
No, sure. You got about, 2,700 people working in your
That's
operation?
correct, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I can tell you very unabashedly that I don't know all the finite details of all of the programs. If I knew them all, we wouldn't need anybody but me and my clerk.
Sounds good. Can you do that?
No, I can't.
Okay.
And I have extremely competent. Let me digress for a minute, just on that competent part. One of the easiest slaps to throw at people is to talk about the do-nothing civil servant. Nothing could be further than the truth.
I agree.
I have in my agency some people that don't do as well as I'd like them to do, but I would challenge anybody to go to any government agency anytime, and you got people working far beyond what the job describes. And my share of those I have, some of whom are in the Federal Insurance Administration. We survey the areas, we work in accordance with guidelines that the Congress has laid down, and we got about $130 billion worth of policies. The riot reinsurance program, the riot program, was a spin-off from that unhappy period in our national history when we were having the riots, and the private industry insurance for riots, reinsurance was not there.
That's about $500 million worth right now, huh?
Well, if that's the number my office gave, that's about the correct number, yes. And the crime insurance program is offered to businesses and to individual families in high crime areas.
In short, you're picking up what the commercial insurers would probably be hesitant to take care of.
That was the start of it, yes.
Okay.
And what we're trying to do now, some of it is getting easier to handle because the insurance industry now, and in some cases the states, through their insurance commissioners, are seeing that they take the federal government out of that part of the business, and that's
Okay.
fine.
All right. Listen, I got a break coming up. Just hold those thoughts. We'll get back to it in just a moment. I'm Jim Slade, and this is the Larry King Show, and our guest is Louis Giuffrida, who is director of the Federal Emergency Management Agency, whose efforts in one way or another have something to do with your life. Now we're trying to figure out, Mr. Giuffrida, how the dice fall sometimes. Recently, when there was the dioxin problem in Missouri, the EPA came in and bought the town. Did that come under your heading? Did you have anything to do with that, if you're talking about insurance? That was a result of a flood.
Yeah, well, yes, there was a result of a flood. It was, in fact, there were a couple of floods in Times Beach.
Mm-hmm.
Times Beach, unfortunately, earlier on in the year had in effect voted itself out of the flood insurance program.
Oh, boy.
But FEMA was there in response to the Disaster Relief Act, which is our responsibility, and we were ministering to the needs under the Disaster Relief Act. Obviously, we provide life-saving services. We can provide temporary housing for up to a year.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We can make in some cases, grants, but the real thrust comes from the fact that we bring in all the other federal agencies. Then, Small Business Administration, the Department of Agriculture, DOJ, and everybody else.
But you would be the first guy that shows up on the scene, figuratively.
Yeah, well, I mentioned earlier that we spend many, many millions of dollars in the states. I also have a regional office in the 10 federal regions, each of the 10 federal regions. When a disaster starts, when something that may turn into a disaster starts, these regional people of mine, who are in a daily contact with the states anyway, go together, and my regional people and the state and local people start to track together the amount of damage that's being experienced, the effectiveness of the response that's being made by the state and local agencies, and the ability of the state and local agencies to handle it. Those data are fed constantly back here to our emergency center in Washington, in my headquarters. When the state has taken, or the state and local governments have taken every action that can reasonably be expected of them within their capability, and the governor declares a state of emergency, he can then request that the president declare a state of emergency or disaster. That determination is really made on the basis of these data that have been coming back to us from the regional office people. And if, in fact, it meets the conditions that the Congress described in the Disaster Relief Act, the President approves on my recommendation the declaration.
He picks up the phone and says, "Hey, is this for real?"
Yeah, well, we have a well-organized plan
Sure.
and system. I'm big on plans and systems. And
You're a former military man.
Yes, I am.
Okay.
and we condense all of these into an executive summary, back up with the whole detail. It goes over to the White House. The president agrees or not agrees, asks for additional data. He then sends a telegram, a letter, a phone call, or all of the above to the governor of the state and says, "I've approved your request, and I have instructed the director of FEMA to implement the pertinent laws." But we're already there, and a lot of other federal agencies are already there long prior to, and many times in cases where it ultimately does not meet the conditions described in the law, but we've still been providing pretty substantial federal assistance.
I'm going to give you a chance right now to blow something right through your pipe, because I know it'll probably make you mad, but do you feel like Big Brother?
Do I feel like Big Brother?
Yeah.
No, I really don't. I think that it's correct for the state and local governments to be expected to take the initial steps. But I think also it's correct for the federal government to be ready to fulfill its part of this national response program, this civil defense program, if the state and local people cannot handle it. No, I think it's a good system.
Do you compare that to to the old-fashioned one neighbor helping another, and you simply, our problems are so big now, it takes something of the size of the federal government to be a neighbor?
Yes, I think so, and I tell you categorically that such a program needs to be and has been and will continue to be scrupulously apolitical. It stems from the legitimate right of the people to expect the government to help them when there's no other help there, and from the government's obligation to do precisely that.
All right, all right. Well, we're having an interesting time here on the Larry King Show. The guest is Louis Giuffrida. If you're just joining us, he's the director of the Federal Emergency Management Agency, an agency which has had some interesting ups and downs in getting itself underway, and sometimes there's been some jokes at its expense, and we've explored those in this hour. And Mr. Giuffrida is going to stick around now for a couple of hours to take your phone calls. So, if you have a question, you want to find out, you want to get into this discussion, we'd be delighted to have you. We'll be taking phone calls right after we take a look at the news. My name is Jim Slade, and this is the Larry King Show, and we're here all the time, every night. Larry's not here, the sniffles. He'll be back very soon, I'm sure, here on Mutual, which, of course, is your network for news and sports. Americans, our guest on the line here is Louis Giuffrida, who is, of course, the director of the Federal Emergency Management Agency. We're having an interesting time talking about what might happen and what could happen and what we might do about it if it did. Let's go to the telephones. First on the line is Chicago. Hello, Chicago.
Hi. I think that evacuation is now an important part of our national defense. The bombs are so big now that they could obliterate a major city, but they're not big enough to decimate the whole United States. And on top of that, there will be a period of tension, I believe, in any presage to a nuclear war, for instance, a war in Europe, where U.S. citizens will have a chance to evacuate. And I wonder how prepared we are for that, and what can we do to prepare more.
All right, Mr. Giuffrida.
Well, thank you for the call. You're right on the money. Evacuation is, in fact, an important part of our national defense. We agree, and everyone, I think, who really digs into the problem agrees that there will be a period of tension. We will get we call that strategic warning.
Are you a little itchy right now?
No.
Now,
how about you, Mr. Giuffrida?
No, well, I'm not satisfied that we are where we could be and should be.
Mm-hmm. But are you a little itchy about the tense situation that's building right now?
No, I'm never comfortable when people are trying to kill each other, even though I'm not fearful that that's going to spill over into...
Mr. Slade?
Yeah.
When I mean a period of tension, I mean something like the Cuban Missile Crisis, where it's...
Yeah, I understand that. I'm asking him if he thinks right now we are in the beginnings of a period of such tension. He's a military man. I want to know.
Well, I used to be a military man.
Well,
I think that the administration and all the components of the administration, in conjunction with our allies, has got a good handle on what's happening, and I'm not concerned that we're in immediate danger or critical danger. My concern stems from the fact that, in my judgment, and I've been in this business for a long time, not just here in Washington, we're not doing what we should be doing in the sense of preparing for all emergencies, with war as one of a series of emergencies for which we must obviously be prepared, but which we do everything we can to avoid. I think the caller is making reference to the fact that the Federal Civil Defense Act mandates that the civil defense program be a part of our national strategic and deterrent posture, and Section 207 of that act directs me as the head of FEMA to ensure that no state program does anything to detract from or to impede the civil defense program as a part of our national security posture.
I'd just like to add that if we're not prepared for evacuation, at some time it may and likely will weaken us. We may have to concede, and a point of tension, it may cause us to actually surrender.
Well, that's right. I think that's a valid concern. But if I can bring it back out of that legitimate concern into one which is on us all the time, like hurricanes and floods and tornadoes, the alternative to a planned and orderly evacuation is spontaneous evacuation. Spontaneous evacuation means that everybody goes helter-skelter.
And that's gridlock.
And that's gridlock.
Okay. Hello, Wilmington, Delaware.
Good morning, Mr. Giuffrida. I'm a good friend of Clark Justice from Wilmington, Delaware. I don't know if you know him.
What was his name, please?
Clark Chester?
Oh, yes.
Head of Delaware Emergency Flag.
Right.
Yeah, I'd like to ask you a couple questions.
Okay.
I think over the last couple of years there's been a wide barrage of articles by the media, saying how devastating a nuclear war would be and all civilization in America would be destroyed. And I heard various reports like Edward Teller say, it's not going to be as bad as people think it is, and maybe only 100 million people would die. And other people, like Physicians for Social Responsibility, said upwards of 180 million would die. I'd like to know, number one, two questions, please. Number one, by your best accord, what would the consequences be in a nuclear war as far as people surviving and people dying and people being injured? How many people, like in the millions? And number two is, would the nuclear war have created permanent radiation that would, disperse over a period of 10 or 15 years, or would it stay in the atmosphere for a longer time than that?
All right, let's try that. Go ahead.
Well, first of all, let me tell you that Dr. Teller is a distinguished scientist, gentleman, and citizen, and a friend of mine. And I know when you say he said there will be only 100 million, it doesn't mean that he doesn't consider that a monstrous number of people. Because I know Dr. Teller, and one person, if sparrow falls to the ground, that song is lost to him, as the poet says, and Dr. Teller believes in that just as fervently as you and I do. If we had no warning, and I don't consider that a real possibility, I do not consider that a real possibility, then we would have casualties on the order of 50 or 60% of the population. That's not just my guess. Those are the best estimates that come from competent people across all agencies of government who spend a lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of concern in coming up with that. If, on the other hand, and that, incidentally, is with no civil defense plan that addresses that scenario. If we had our program in place, and that's 7 years of the program, then, and that scenario that I've described is an all-out attack. But with our program in place, then our guess is that we could improve the chances of survival for up to 80% of the population. Your question about the length of time that the country would be radioactive is one that I'm not equipped to answer in really scientific detail. I will tell you, though, that it would be a terrible mess.
Sure.
And I mean everybody. I can't imagine any rational person anywhere not being appalled at the thought that men would willfully cast that kind of destruction at one another.
I can't imagine.
But we have no guarantee that it would never happen.
That's right. All right, we'll pause here. We have to take a break. We'll get right back to more calls. Our phone number on the Larry King Show, as usual, is 202-685-2177. If you want to join this conversation, be sure to get with us this morning. We'd love to hear from you. All the ideas are welcome. Welcoming to the Larry King Show this week, WKYX, Paducah, Kentucky, joining us on the network. We're delighted to have you there. All right, Berwyn, Pennsylvania, hello.
Yes, I have recently invested in a bomb shelter. I'd say about 1972. I've dug down about 30 feet below my house, and it's a rather practical problem, but I'd like to know whether it's worth keeping it up. Back then, I was a little worried about the Russian-American relations, and I decided to invest in one. And I was wondering if it's worth keeping it up or not, because I realized to keep this place going, it costs about $5,000 a year.
Good glory. What are you doing, storing potatoes in it now?
Yes, I'm storing food, and I'm storing vegetables and everything, and to keep this place up, it does cost quite a bit a
The
year.
old-fashioned root cellar. Well, what do you think, Mr. Giuffrida?
Well, I think if you were concerned enough to do that in the first place, and it makes you feel and your family feel more comfortable and safe, and you can afford to maintain it, that really is a personal choice for you. The program that we're working on starts from the administration's determination to avoid war, and then addresses both in-place shelters, such as you've already built in your place, evacuations.
But you're talking about civic shelters, aren't you? You're not talking about individual
No, I'm
homeowners.
talking, well, when we say in place, we mean citizens such as this, if they feel compelled and capable to do that, plus mass shelter areas.
Okay. Rumor has it, though, that these in-place shelters really do no good. You can go down as far as you want, but the fallout radiation, is eventually going to kill you. And I was wondering if 20 feet of concrete below your house is going to do any good. It's more of a practical problem than moral, and I realize that. And I've heard various opinions upon this matter, and I was wondering if you could shed any light upon this matter.
Well, rather than take all the time to answer this question, let me invite you to write to FEMA.
Okay.
That's 500 C Street Southwest, and make reference in your cover letter to your questions to this show, and my staff will send you the data that we have on that subject.
Very good. Thank you very much.
All right, we'll see you. So long. Louisville, Kentucky. Hello.
Yes, Mr. Giuffrida, am I pronouncing your name correctly?
Giuffrida is correct, and thank you, ma'am.
All right. Yes. Now, 7 months ago, I had a call from Gallup poll. About 7 to 9 months ago.
We found somebody who actually got one of those calls.
Yes, ma'am.
I actually did. And I'm going to tell you what they said. They said a lot of other things, but I thought that they stressed, had I ever been evacuated? And I said, yes, I had during tornadoes of '74 in Louisville, Kentucky. We had terrible, and I did think that's what he said. If the government ordered you, is this familiar to you?
Yes, that sounds correct.
If the government ordered you to evacuate, would you? And I said, no. She said, why wouldn't you? I said, well, I'd have to feel that it was to my best interest, not to the government's.
Oh. Well, I think that was a good answer, ma'am. I think you're very lucky in Louisville. You got somebody like Wilbur Bunton there in your emergency and civil defense system, and you've had not just the tornadoes and hurricanes and things, but you've had sewer explosions and other things there.
We have everything. But that's no. We've had floods. I lived through floods and wars and. But that's no big deal. When they called me and said, "Will I evacuate?" And I said, "No, I would not."
But let me ask you this, ma'am: would you expect the government to be able to help you to evacuate if you felt it was in your best interest?
I don't think they can. How could they?
Well, they could provide the kind of communications and provide for food and shelter. They could show you which roads to take. They could make sure that everybody didn't jam all the roads at the same time.
I know which roads to take.
Okay. Well, you stay out of trouble, whatever you do. We appreciate your call. Hello, Annapolis, Maryland.
All right, yes, good morning, gentlemen. First off, I'd like to just say to Mr. Giuffrida that I'm a disc jockey, and frequently I've seen, the EBS roll across the wire, and always pretty much throughout the time, although I took it seriously, never gave it a thought. And I'd like to say to you, Mr. Giuffrida, that you've really kind of opened my eyes. You're a phenomenal speaker. I wonder where you've been all the while. It's very interesting to hear you tonight, and I'm very interested to hear everything you have to say. I have a question. We talk so much about the Russians being the nuclear threat. What happens, I know we could what-if you to death tonight, but what happens if, say, a smaller country, maybe some country in the Middle East, became a nuclear threat? Would we be able to monitor them as we do the Russians?
Well, I'm not the one in the government who would have that responsibility, but my answer to you is yes, we would.
Okay, thank you.
You got to rest. You've got to rest in some trust of people like the CIA. And they do a good job.
They do, and we have good allies, too.
That's very correct. Hello, Evansville, Indiana.
Yeah, this is WGBS, your affiliate in Evansville.
All right. Got a station break on
How you
there.
doing today?
Pretty good. You're on the board right now?
Already?
Because you're staying awake. Lots of coffee.
Already?
Okay, what's going on?
Well, the question I had was, you were talking about the EBS test earlier on.
Right.
And my question is this. What is actually supposed to happen when you have an EBS test? I mean, you do the test, you throw a tone up for 30 seconds or 60 seconds, and, what does that tell the public? What are we actually supposed to do?
Well, I'm glad to get two such calls from two participants. What we're testing is the entire system, the internal system, and I think a logical part of that has to be to condition the public without crying wolf needlessly and without over-dramatizing, but to condition to the public to the fact that this is a legal, legitimate, and necessary part of our national system, public and private.
Now, back in the days when I was working aboard and we had the old Conelrad system, there would be one station in the region that would set off the test, and all the others would be tuned to it. It would trip a receiver in our control room. Now, is that still the way it works? Everybody does it themselves individually.
Yeah, everybody does it by himself now, right?
I thought that was sort of a warning system that was kind of effective, but sometimes the receivers didn't work.
I'd like to just add to this. You caller, you're a very important part of this whole process. And what I was alluding to was that I've got 5 children. My kids are typical kids. They're laid back, but they listen too, and it was complicating a problem to teach those children that there is responsibility, not frivolity, in these systems. And I said it at that time that I made that comment. I never thought I'd be here in Washington doing this job. I was just concerned because I thought it was a thoughtless. I don't think it was maliciousness. It was thoughtlessness that was causing that particular DJ and some others that I'd heard. And then I got interested and I'd listen if I'd drive up around the state.
He may have thought he was making a political statement of some kind.
Yeah, he may have, but I think it was ill-advised.
Okay. All right. We got to move on. Thanks for the call, Evansville. Eugene, Oregon. Hello.
Hello. I'd like to ask a question about the evacuation plans. I've heard something about. It seems they always.
Okay, we got 2 minutes. I just want to tell you that. Go ahead.
It seems they always depend on people having a car, and I'm just wondering, what does somebody do that doesn't have a car? I mean, there's a large segment of the population that, how are they going to get out of the cities? I mean, if you've been on the buses or subways at rush hour, everybody can't fit on public transportation. But what are they going to do? They're just stuck?
No, the plan that we're looking at addresses every available means of transportation, privately owned vehicles, buses, trains, even subways and things of that sort. It does not hang on everybody having his own car.
Yeah, but that's not enough. I mean, what you're really saying is people don't have cars, they can cram on the buses, okay.
No, that's not.
Most of them are out of luck.
No, that's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is that the plan takes cognizance of the fact that not everybody has a car, and it includes collection points where people go, collect, the transportation goes and picks them up and takes them on.
Okay, can I ask you another question?
Okay, we got 1 more minute.
All right, what's your view on the defense spending, the budget?
I don't know what you mean. You have to clarify the question.
All right, well, do you think the defense spending needs to be increased, as Reagan says, or it's too much, or what?
No, I think that the president and those that have been building the defense budget have given long and serious thought to it, and that's their best judgment, and I support it.
Okay, you support war then. Okay, thank you.
No, that's not what I said at all, man. Don't give me that jazz. I said I support the budget. I've been in wars. I abhor war, and I don't. That's not what I'm saying at all. Don't burlesque my answers, please.
Very good. All right. We're having a lively session here this morning. We'll get back to more calls right after we take a brief break here. Our guest is Louis Giuffrida, who is director of the Federal Emergency Management Agency. And so as I said earlier in the program, here's a gentleman whose everyday actions have quite a bit to do with your life. And we certainly should all be tuned to what's happening here. I only have a couple of minutes or a couple of seconds, Mr. Giuffrida, but how about towns rehearsing evacuation? Is that viable? Yes or no? I mean,
yes, it is. I think, but when I say rehearse, that doesn't mean evacuate the entire population. It means rehearse the people who have to implement the plan.
All right. I'm Jim Slade. This is the Larry King Show, and we're on Mutual, which is your network for news and sports.